Hello, welcome to the Thrive Elevate panel for organizations. This is the first panel for August 26, 2024. My name is Anne Marie McCaskill Davis. I'm the Cultural Funding Specialist Senior with the City of Austin's Cultural Arts Division. Welcome to the panel. I want to also introduce our facilitator today, Priscilla Hale. She'll be supporting our panel discussion. I'm going to go through a quick overview of the full panel process, just for the awareness of the viewers today, and then we'll get started with our first application. So panelists have reviewed all applications prior to today. They have provided tentative comments and scores. As we go through the panel today, panelists are allowed to change their scores, and we'll have an opportunity to finalize those scores throughout the day. We will allow a maximum of 10 minutes per application to review. We will stop the recording and stop the timer if there are any technical issues that arise. Panelists will provide comments, but won't necessarily repeat what's already been said by other panelists. Keep in mind that panelists are not scoring on consensus, so there can be divergent opinions on panel applications, and we encourage panelists to provide commentary to explain why their scoring decision is different than the rest of the panel. What else? We will not be announcing numeric scores as we go through the panel discussion. The panelists will provide overall application comments. The comments that they provide should be aligning with the scoring criteria from the scoring rubric. And they should not be basing scores on information that is not part of the scoring rubric, things like financial need or geographic location. Those are not scoring criteria, and so panelists should not be scoring based on that. We have asked panelists to look beyond grantsmanship, and if the information is within the application but was difficult to find, then they can include that in their score. They can certainly provide or certainly count the information that was found in the application towards the score, but they can comment for future improvement to clarify where that information is found. Panelists are allowed to use firsthand experience. They can also reference websites of the applicants, but it was not a requirement of them to do so. If a panelist has a conflict of interest, they will recuse themselves from the panel by turning off their camera and muting themselves. And then we will continue with the panel discussion of that application. Once it's over, that panelist will be invited to return to participate in the panel for the rest of the panels. That really covers it. We'll have a primary and secondary reviewer for each application. That does not mean that those are the only two people who reviewed that application. It's just a way for us to facilitate conversation to ensure that there are people who are going to talk in a little bit more detail about each application. Panelists have reviewed and scored every single application that have been assigned to this panel day. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to preset the timer for 10 minutes. And we'll start with the first application today, which is Waterloo Greenway. Tiffany will be our primary reviewer and eBay will be the secondary. So I'll begin the timer as soon as Tiffany starts speaking. So whenever you're ready to begin, Tiffany, you may go.
So I started off with Waterloo Greenway. Waterloo Greenway has developed, I believe, since 2010, and I'm familiar with their programming. I've enjoyed their programming. It was nice to read through their application. They are focused on serving communities who are at immediate risk of cultural erasure. This was not historically so, but they have grown into that. pulling up my notes. They do provide specialized adaptations and services for non-English speaking communities. And they do provide some expanded ADA access in their events. They do show how funding can support the stabilization of their organization, although it does seem that the funding is primarily geared towards supporting of events, and some more expansion would be helpful there. And that's it.
Thank you. eBay, you may begin your review.
Yes, I enjoyed going through this application as well. I really liked that in the day and age of digital presence for most of their channels, including like the social media presence, I'll mention YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. They're very engaging and up to date. I had never been to any of their events prior. I hadn't heard about them. So it was nice to see that most of what they had said in the application was reflected in real time on their digital platforms. Just trying to see other notes that I had. I like that in the intersectionality section, they mentioned how their key constituents are intersectional, and made notes of that. And also appreciated the language accessibility in their programming. I think I'm trying to see if I have more comments over here. Yeah, I think that was it on my end.
Thank you, Tiffany and eBay. Would like to invite other panelists if there's anything you'd like to add. Steve?
Yeah, so it's some really fascinating and interesting work. And I think when we talk about the arts, oftentimes we immerse ourselves indoors, isolated, say on a Zoom call for the day. But area of potential improvement, when you got to the first part of the accessibility question, there's a lot of language that serves to or acts in a way that removes autonomy from people who are disabled. So they use the phrase universal accessibility. Universal accessibility is an impossibility. They talk about how easy things are for people who are disabled. As someone who is a quadriplegic, what may be physically capable for you may not be physically capable for me. And to be very mindful of that. But I loved what they were discussing in the last paragraph about using the 3D model for people who are visually impaired. In park spaces, I don't think there's enough in terms of tactile tours and tactile placements. And that's something that serves a community in a really wonderful way that I don't see enough of.
Thank you, B.
Okay, are there any other comments? Or Hector, I saw you.
I was like,
Yes, the only thing, just wanted to add to what's been said, is that the applicant in their budget didn't add costs for marketing and or specialized accessibility services.
can you repeat the very last part?
Yeah,
Hector, you kind of
Yeah.
trailed off a little bit, so
Yeah.
just say it a little more.
It's related to the budget. The applicant is not in the budget. That's in the two items. The cost for marketing and for specialized accessibility. There was no expenses for that. The budget was fine, except they didn't have that item completed. It was blank.
Okay. If there are no additional comments, if panelists will please finalize their scores. And if you could just give me a thumbs up once you're ready to go. And EBA, are you ready to go? Are you ready? Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next application, creative action. EBA will be the primary and B will be the secondary. So I will begin the timer as soon as you begin speaking. Go ahead, take it away, EBA.
Thank you. So let's see. Creative Action, they are an organization that uses arts as a medium to inspire creativity, unlock potential, and transform the lives of students of all ages. And their vision is that one student, one project, and one community at a time, they would be able to be a force for equity, belonging, and joy in our society. And so going over this application, I really loved how detailed they were regarding their key constituencies, mentioned to several foundations, including the Mary Lee Foundation, Local Arts Under 30, other CA participants. I think an area of improvement, I would say, is, like I mentioned, they're in the day and age of digital presence, it would be nice to see how with their programs, they are indeed making an impact on their key constituencies. I like that they had a very detailed calendar on their websites, just showing the programs that they have coming along. It would just have been nice to see more of that impact that I had seen in their application. And then I have here, I think an area of potential improvement I had said was just specifically in their marketing when it comes to key constituencies, if they had gone into more detail on how they did that, say something like, maybe this Facebook group that's specifically created for, let's see, like single mothers, just making note specifically of those key constituencies. I would have liked to see that. But overall, I think this was a detailed application. Trying to go over their budgeting. I didn't see anything for production fees, and as they do have programs listed on their calendar for this year and next year even, it would have been nice to see some amount dedicated to that for the production fees. And then want to make sure I'm making note of their that's most of my notes I have right here.
Thank you. B?
Yeah, really interesting to learn about the work of this organization. As was referenced before, but I think it's worth pointing out, the wealth of programs that they're offering over the course of the year, which provides a pretty eclectic range of key constituencies. What I wish there was more of is what is the makeup of the organization. So we have some info provided from leadership, but we don't have a demographic breakdown of the board provided, of those who are on staff. That makes it difficult at times as an assessor to contextualize what exists within the general leadership and how that matches or doesn't match to key constituencies. There is no budget allocation for accessibility, but they have a working group in theory. I made a note on this because there's a lot that seemingly could have been allocated in this space that feels like perhaps a lost opportunity with where the extra 150,000 can go if they were to get the grant. Scrolling through here, when it came to the marketing section, there's is well detailed, is well laid out, but there was no demographic specificity. So it required sort of reading between the lines, and was hard to verify at times of how that would engage with the city's key constituencies and how that would engage with their key constituencies. But what I really enjoy with a lot of educationally focused entities, they work with youth or they work with adults within a particular space, but they don't do both. They've got so many eggs in the basket, so to speak, to provide for tens of thousands of people in the city of Austin during the summer throughout the year, which I think is really, really cool. I did have to go back to look at prior responses in my scoring. So at times that the info wasn't necessarily in the answer to a prompt, but in a lot of areas I was able to find it elsewhere. And at times it was a bit hard to keep track of everything that it is that they're doing, which can happen when you're an organization that is representing multifaceted components of the arts.
Thank you so much, B. I just want to, before we move on, I
Yeah.
just want to make one clarifying point really quickly. In terms of the budget where we talk about production expenses, it does not necessarily have to be only in the production fees line item. It can be anything else that could apply as a production expense in the other line item. So I just want to make sure that that might be a clarifying point.
Thank you, Amir. And I want to add to B's comment about the demographic information not being available for the leadership. I just want you to know that that information is provided, B, but it's concealed from you all as reviewers. And so it's there, but I think what you're saying, what might make it stronger, given that some of this questions is around, does the leadership match the constituency? So maybe the applicant finding a way to speak to overall how they represent that would be something that would have made this stronger. But I do want you to know that that could be a space where people didn't feel that they needed to do that because it is provided in another section. But I will say to applicants and here that is also a place in which you might want to consider in the future to figure out how to share that information so that it's clear that the leadership and the board is representative of the constituents, and it could be done, in more of a narrative form than it is in numerical form. So I wanted to say that, but then also invite the other panelists to give any additional comments that you may have that weren't shared previously?
I guess to add to that, I struggled to find that information also in the history of service response. There's a lot of information about the educational programming, but knowing how it is specifically serving the key constituency groups that have been defined by the city of Austin, I was having trouble getting that information there too. So just I think throughout the whole application, just adding that would be helpful.
Anyone else have anything to add?
Okay, with no other comments, you may go ahead and finalize your scores. And while you're doing that, you can go ahead and start pulling up Austin Film Festival. Is our next application up for review? And then just give me a thumbs up when you finalize your scores for creative action and you're ready to move on to Austin Film Festival. And B, are you ready to roll? All right, so next up is Austin Film Festival. Tiffany will be the primary and eBay will be the secondary. Tiffany, whenever you're ready to begin, I will start the timer.
So the Austin Film Festival's mission is to further the art and craft of storytelling by inspiring and championing the work of writers, filmmakers, and all artists who use written and visual language to tell a story. They did a very good job of showing how they are serving the key constituency groups defined through the city of Austin. And they've also done a really good job of showing how they have historically met that need. They did evolve to meet that need, but they have definitely done a really good job in supporting that. Their administrative and creative leadership do reflect some of the key constituency groups. There could be some room for growth there, but they do reflect that. I did enjoy reading through the proposed events. I felt like they do a pretty good job of providing activities with specialized adaptations for services for folks who are non-English speakers and for providing expanded, where is it at? Accessibility services. Else. I think the only other area that's for funding, they do include that they're going to fund an operations manager position. And I am curious with how the success of that position is measured and how the funding for that position is sustained after, if they receive Thrive after that continues. So that was a question that I had on the grant. But yeah.
Thank you. eBay.
Okay. Yes, I enjoyed going over. I'm familiar with their work that they're doing. And for the cultural activities section, for the proposed public activity, just going off of their key constituents, I would have liked to see how their proposed activities are actively serving the key constituents in regards to they mention a couple of films Let's see, I'm just trying to make sure. Panel conversations, structure and storytelling. I would, for the proposed activities, it would be nice to see how they align with the key constituencies that they mention. I like that they have the percentages in terms of how the groups are identifying, but specifically in regards to the stories that are being told with the films and the programming. That was one thing I noted on here. That was my main note from reviewing this application.
Thank you. Any other panelists that would like to add?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the work of Austin Film Festival. There's a really nice, seemingly forward evolution in terms of inclusion within how the organization is operating. Given that it's to a certain extent, it's a destination-based organization, which is to say that there's a lot of people who are flying into Austin who are not from Austin. Or from anywhere even close by. I wish that I had more info about who are the speakers that they are bringing in, the films that they're programming, and then what is the audience in Austin like, and are there differences between those three things? So we have more info in this application about the speakers, many of whom are not from Austin, versus necessarily who are the key constituencies broken down here in the city proper of who's going to their year-round programming. While they do program films from other countries, there's not really anything that's indicated in the application in terms of, say, doing Q&A in another language. Do you, for example, have a film that is not just catering to a Japanese-speaking audience, but has Japanese and English Q&A done simultaneously? Because simply screening an international film isn't necessarily language adaptation. I love that they use Rev. I wish more film organizations would use Rev. And I love that they provide some funding support for it. I will note, though, that a lot of the accessibility stuff that they reference are things that are already required by the ADA. And I'll just throw this out there as an organization. Closed captioning is wonderful. But if you're already doing closed captioning, why not do open captions? It costs no extra money to do open captions, but it widens the capabilities and reduces the dependency of people who are low vision of having to use devices that can potentially isolate them from viewing the film.
It could be anybody else have anything there? Well, I guess. Here.
All right, seeing that there are no additional comments, please go ahead and finalize your scores. Okay, is everybody ready to go? Hector and B, do you still need more time? Or are you good? Great. All right, the next application up for review is the Vortex. B will be the primary and Tiffany will be the secondary. B, whenever you begin speaking, I will start the timer.
Awesome. So the Vortex is a magical green new theater with a butterfly bar and sanctuary. They operate in a 6 square section of the Black Cultural District of Austin. This is a fascinating organization to read by. Amelia is an organization I'd never heard of. They exist both as a active space for their own resources, but also for other companies to utilize. They have a number of performances, which I think is really cool, for different potential key constituencies. So to see reference to ASL performances next to a trans queer social was super, super intriguing, and definitely caught my eye. In evaluating the application, oftentimes I had to go back to other sections to get the information that I needed. So whether it was in cultural leadership or cultural activities, so like in the cultural activities response, it was a bit opaque at times, and I found myself making notes and going back to the very first section. I love the detailed bio sets though about their leadership. It may have been at times too much information, but it really allowed me to see and contextualize the commitment of the people who are participating and the eclectic nature of those individuals. As I mentioned with the prior application, when it comes to accessibility, a lot of things that are referenced are things that are required by the ADA. A piece of information I'd like to have, since they stage shows here, is what is the disability breakdown of the people that they are casting? And I realize that shows may not necessarily be cast yet. They do have a really good calendar breakdown of what's upcoming and what is potentially upcoming, not just for the rest of the year, but into 2025 and 2026. This is just a general note when it came into the marketing section. Just assume that the people who are evaluating your application don't have prior knowledge. So they referenced a place called Patrizi's. And I do not live in Austin. I had no idea what it was. And so I had to do some other homework. It still wasn't entirely clear to me what value it provided in marketing, but it's one of those things where having a little more context would have been helpful, though I will note to them that as I'm in Austin at the moment, I did go and eat at the restaurant out of curiosity. So a little bit of extra exposure.
So I'm very familiar with the Vortex and with Butterfly Bar. The organization has been in Austin for quite some time. It's consistently served from a place of equity historically and currently, and it provides, I love looking at the programming that they're looking to provide and how they're constantly trying to find ways to evolve and serve their community and key constituency groups. I would say the main thing that stuck out to me was actually marketing. Pull that part up. So more information on marketing efforts to reach audience members with disabilities and audience members whose primary language is not English, and then efforts to reach tourists. I think it's possible that those things may occur, but I was not able to get that information very well from the answer. There was a comment about billboards being placed in and around Austin to attract tourists, although if an individual is driving through Austin and sees a billboard, they are not pulled in to Austin. They saw it from a billboard. So other ways of reaching tourists would be helpful to expand on. And there are goals that are clearly outlined for 2025. It would be nice to see how those goals will impact the organization throughout the future of the organization. So how does a roof impact the organization? I can make assumptions on how that might be beneficial, of course, but just more information about how that's going to lead to long-term sustainability. Just more, how are you measuring your goals and outcomes? But otherwise, I really enjoyed reading through the application and
Thank you. I'd like to invite other panelists if you have additional things to add.
I enjoyed going over this application and just how detailed it was. I have a note here on their capacity building expenses. I noticed that that was blank, and I believe it would have been nice to see how they would have used the funds to build upon everything they're doing for the future. Yes, they have the calendar and the detailed plan for all of their events, but it would have been nice to see how those funds would have been allocated in that regard. And this was just it was like a second minor note I had here, but in one of their work samples, it was a private video, so I did not have access to it. It was password protected. So in that case, I just went ahead to their social media and their digital spaces and was able to get an idea. However, it would have been nice for all of the work samples to kind of just been open, so that would be easy for me to see.
Do you have anything? All right. Thank you, everybody. Anne-Marie, you're muted.
All right, if there are no additional comments, then we can go ahead and finalize scores for the Vortex, and we'll move on to the next application. The next application, just so you can prep for it, is Imagine Art. Hector will be the primary and B will be the secondary, and just give me a thumbs up when you're ready to go. And Tiffany and EBA, y'all are good to go? Okay, great. All right, next up is Imagine Art. Hector, whenever you're ready to begin, I'll start the timer.
Okay, so what they plan to do, their activities that they talked about, is to build financial security because they want to hire a grant writer. They want to strengthen their organizational capacity by hiring a consultant to facilitate strategic planning. They want to return to their mission, and so they're hiring a creative director. And the last proposed activity, actually I'll add a little bit more, but they want to deepen engagement of BIPOC populations. And what they have is they have a space quite large, 8,000 square feet, where artists live and they work, and they provide everything that they need, that the artists need, creative space, supplies, equipment, everything that they need. They also have some possibility of providing a job, and they mentioned how important it is for them to center equity, particularly with the voices of people with disabilities. The impact that they talk about is that, you know, it's through just the capacity building that's very critical, and the you know, what they're able to supply to these artists. The only thing that I noticed overall, the detail in the application was very good. They also what's the other thing I was going to say? Yeah, they answered in every section. They included everything that was important for me to know about their application. Budget was fine. Everything was really good. The only thing, and they mentioned it, was that they need to do a better job of reaching out to and including more people of color and LGBTQ. That's the only thing that I noticed about this application. Otherwise, I think they did a really great job of fulfilling the requirements of each section that they wrote about.
Awesome. Thank you, Hector.
Mhm.
I'm actually just going to read the second sentence in the first prompt from their application. These artists are deaf and deafblind, have autism, are physically disabled with cerebral palsy and spina bifida, and mental disabilities like schizophrenia. I love, love, love that response, because a lot of times when we talk about disability, we solely define it as physical disability. And this cites and really lays out the diversity that exists within serving a disabled community, and acknowledges people who may not even look at themselves necessarily as disabled. And it's really wonderfully detailed. I'm actually kind of jealous. I don't know of any organization and artist that has similar housing. And I really wish that we did. And there's just a wealth of information about what they do that contextualizes the services and the need for these communities. As Hector noted, and they do reference in the application, there is potentially more that can be done in terms of servicing BIPOC LGBTQIA plus persons. But it's a bit of a flag for me because it's not clear how they're going to reach that. And when we're talking about disabled demographics, we're 25% of the country, making it the second largest minority in Austin, but we are 40% roughly of the LGBTQIA plus community, which is to say disproportionately impacted. And in the leadership section, there's not enough info that's provided to us in terms of how leadership overlaps and matches these constituencies, but also I kept looking as like, from a contextualized perspective, are there board members, for example, who are alumni or active users of this organization? A lot of times when we're dealing with organizations with people who are disabled or people who are low income, the board is made up of people who are not necessarily benefiting from the work that the organization does. And scroll down. You know, there's so much overlap. I love the intersectionality response. It ran the risk of falling into tokenism. I don't feel that it did that. But as I referenced, right, that the numbers of disabled people are even higher in these other communities. That's another way that potentially that response could have been framed. But overall, a really solid application organization I loved learning about. And after this is done, you have to tell me how you got money from the city of Austin to get this building. And then I can, find an apartment and live there.
Thank you, Hector and B. Like to invite other panelists to offer up any comments.
Okay, seeing no additional comments, go ahead and finalize your scores for Imagine Art. Next up, we'll be looking at Latinitas. Hector will be the primary and EBA will be the secondary. I'll give you all just a couple more seconds to wrap up, and if you'll just give me a thumbs up when you're ready, we can start.
Are you ready for me to start, Anne-Marie?
Let's just wait 1 second and make sure that Tiffany is all
Okay.
set.
Just let me know.
Okay, Hector, whenever you're ready to begin, I'll start the timer.
Okay. Latinitas. I know a little bit about this organization, and I was under the impression they primarily served young Latina women in STEM, to help them, get education and go to college. What they're planning to do here is to do actually they're going to do 6 installations of what they call a heritage mosaic installations. And these installations will be, they list the people that are going to be in charge with it. They have experience in doing this work, and they're choosing sites through East Austin. The other thing that they're doing is that they are geomapping culture sites, which means that I think I don't know if it's both. Yeah, it is mainly young women who will, will map the. They have a summer camp called GeoChica, and so they will map up those sites. And let's see. Overall, they provided specific information on their activities, on who they serve, intersectionality, and so overall, I had a difficult time finding anything that I would recommend changing. I'm going to look through my notes but yes, that's what I have.
Okay, EBA, whenever you're ready.
Have great things to say about this application. I had never heard about this organization, and it felt refreshing just seeing that everything or most of what they described in their application I could see in their digital channels, and it's very engaging. They have a good amount of people on their Facebook. With their work samples, it was very nice to see. They have a video of a couple of young girls within their key constituencies describing this gorgeous mural that when I was on the east side of Austin, Texas, I would work out by that mural, and every time I would just sing praises of the artist who designed it. So it was nice to see that it was from the work that they're doing. So it was very refreshing just seeing that they are actively impacting the key constituencies that they mentioned. In their capacity building, let me make sure I see that. In their capacity building expense, they had mentioned that they would have one community program leader hire. And I was just wondering if that would go towards their salary and like how they actually hire, if they post on Indeed or if they focus within their key constituencies as well. So maybe just a little bit more detail on, you know, just expanding the work that they're doing, especially when it comes to including more people in their organization. But I thoroughly enjoyed going over this application.
Thank you, Hector and eBay. Would like to invite other panelists to add any comments.
Yeah, one, I just want to acknowledge how remarkable it is to continue to thrive with what this organization is doing at a time where similar national-based organizations just in the last few months have folded or are on the verge of folding. And I found myself wanting for more info with the geo mapping, what that is going to be, and how they're going to go about using that. For example, from an accessibility standpoint, the response is a bit opaque. And if perhaps, for example, using people who are blind so that the geo mapping will have structural audio description that is done in collaboration with those individuals. And I know that it's a female Latin-focused organization. There was no reference to queer individuals at all. So, for example, would trans women, trans Latino women, would that fall in? And what does that mean potentially for engagement, and how that perspective then potentially shapes this geomapping project? I love the application. I don't know if they have this info, but I found myself just curious, you know, what are the high school graduation rate differences perhaps for participants and alumni of this program? What about, you know, colleges they go to, or, you know, what percent, whatever it is, wind up working in the sciences? And I know they may not have that info, but to begin to pull that information, and they had I will say, even though it's not on the core application, they had really, really good supporting materials.
That's good thing. Good. Thank you.
All right, any other final comments? If none, go ahead and finalize your scores. We're right at 11 a.m., so we're going to move into our first break of the morning. We'll take 15 minutes and we'll start again at 11 a.m., 11:15 a.m. I believe it's Mexicarte is next on the list, and we'll start right at 11:15. Thank you. All right, welcome back. We're going to go ahead and get started with the next group of applications to review. The first one up is Mexicarte Museum. Tiffany will be primary and Hector will be secondary. Let me get the timer set up. Okay, Tiffany, whenever you're ready to begin, I'll start the timer.
Excuse me. So I'm very familiar with Mexicarte. They have a strong history of serving key constituency groups, and they continue to deliver valuable programming to the city of Austin and its residents. The majority of the creative leadership reflect the key constituency group the organization serves. The museum produces a lot of programming throughout the year. I'm always impressed with how much they produce. It would be really nice to see the museum provide some expanded ADA access. They did state that additional accommodations are provided by request only. So it would be nice to see that developed. The organization does describe how funding can support the stabilization of the organization. They do talk about hiring a couple, where is it? They talk about using funding for salaries and benefits. And my question and concern is, again, how do we measure this so that it's able to sustain throughout after the Thrive funding is gone? So when Thrive runs out, will they still be able to provide those benefits for those employees and that sort of thing? So just more measurable results would be helpful to see in that ending position. But the application was very well written and very well reflective of what they do. And I enjoyed it.
Yeah, Tiffany did a great job of describing this applicant, and I am familiar with their work. I have attended the museum and several of their events in the past. The only concern that I had is that they do not mention how these activities directly impact, right, the key constituencies of the grant, right? The other one is around accessibility, since people need to go to them for most of the activities, from what I noticed there. And when I've gone, I've had to go to them, right? Just wondering how they plan to, and they didn't explain how they plan to increase accessibility for people that are not near the downtown area.
That's a good one. Yeah.
That is all.
Thank you, Hector and Tiffany. Are there any other comments from other panelists?
Okay.
I do want to add, I think this is the applicant that talked about that there is ways to look at some of their programming online. So I think just a point of something that we might want to just follow back up on. And in addition to, I think there's also the mention of that they would be temporarily relocating as part of this process. So maybe even in that piece, there's more that they could have shared around. I mean, and I don't know, maybe they don't know where they're going to be temporarily relocated, but I did think that I saw something that there was some availability online. So, but if there are other folks that have anything to add to the comments.
Okay, seeing that there are no additional comments, if you'll finalize your scores. And then the next application we'll review will be Austin Creative Reuse. And then just give me a thumbs up when you're ready to roll. The primary and secondary who will be reviewing Austin Creative Reuse is EB will be the primary and B is going to be the secondary. And I think if everyone's ready, eBay, you may go whenever you'd like, and I'll start once you begin speaking.
Okay. Austin Creative Reuse. Um, their website is very detailed. I appreciate that they have a timeline from when they started in 2009 and how they had been all volunteers up until 2016, which they then hired their first employee. So that was nice to see that they're actively re-engaging their key constituencies. A brief note on their mission and vision. Their mission is to foster conservation and reuse through creativity, education, and community building. And this is evident through all of the work that they are doing. Through the application, a note I had was on their cultural, let's see this, let me pull this up. On their cultural activities, I like how detailed it was in terms of hosting their 4th reuse fashion show, offering at least 2 reuse markets per year. All of that was great. I would have liked to see, just based on their key constituencies, and since they're also based on the East Side, with launching their long-awaited artist in residency program, because I mean, Austin is a city full of artists. It would be nice to see how they're going about that, if that's specifically catered towards, you know, people that they mentioned in their key constituencies, especially on the East Side audiences. That would have been nice to go into a bit of detail on their proposed programs. I like that I was able to check back, had never been to any of their events, but I like that I was able to check back on their history and see the fashion shows and the reuse markets and all of that. I would just have liked to see more detail in their proposed programs in regards to their key constituencies and how they're actively impacting the lives of their key constituencies. But other than that, this was a solid application.
Yeah, I will say that they start by providing a wonderful context of their evolution, what they're providing to the city of Austin, how they've grown to be one of the largest similar organizations in terms of how they operate as a reuse space. In the cultural leadership section, there's a really big divide between what is the staff leadership and what is the board leadership, and specifically, it lists that 13% of the board members are people of color. I would have liked to have seen later in the application, especially in terms of goals, how they would use this opportunity to position to have the board more accurately reflect the leadership and then the demographics, right, the key constituencies that they want to serve. Because based upon how many people are on the board, I was able to quickly figure out how many BIPOC people are on said board. And in that case, BIPOC, I would say isn't even the right term, because we're talking about a specific person. And whenever there's just one of us trying to represent a large S, that's a potentially risky situation to be in. In the marketing section, they have a nice eclectic nature in terms of marketing that they offer. It wasn't entirely clear with what they cited how they would be engaging with tourists, and they did reference a local newspaper, which admittedly I know people who are not based in Austin that read it, but seemed to me maybe perhaps a bit of a stretch. And I was curious, you know, this runway show, how that possibly could grow, utilizing digital medium. What could be done to widen the reach of it and potentially widen the scope. But really interesting organization to learn about, and overall a pretty well done application.
You be in there. Any other panelists have any additional comments to add?
Seeing no additional comments, let's go on and finalize our scores. And we'll move on to the next application.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Let me just add one thing here.
Oh,
Bea,
yeah,
I
go
know
ahead.
you mentioned, and I was digging through, trying to find it in here. You had mentioned about their board representation. I did want to add that in the narrative, they spoke to the current board is engaged with the process in order to ramp up their diversity around board members. So I just wanted to state that they did acknowledge it, and they spoke to a plan as to how to further that. So
Thank you, Priscilla. All right, the next application we're going to review is Sims Foundation. Tiffany is the primary and EBA is the secondary. Whenever you're ready to begin, Tiffany, I will start the timer.
Okay. So Sims is an organization that primarily provides mental health services to musicians throughout the Austin area. I'm really glad that organizations like Sims exists. I also can add that I like to see that the organization has a focus on specifically growing the provider pool to include more bilingual trained professionals and ASL trained professionals. I know currently in the mental health world that it is very hard to get bilingual therapists right now. There's a huge lack of them. And so I know that that is a struggle just across the board, especially in Texas. They do state that the majority of people that Sims serves are white. It's listed at 60%, and the organization has identified intention to expand reach to better accommodate BIPOC and LGBTQ communities. I would like more information on how the organization is going to achieve this. They do talk about wanting to do it and different ways of including, again, bilingual ASL therapists and so forth, but just more information on how that will be achieved. And that's it.
Thank you, Tiffany. I agree on what you shared. A specific note I have is on their cultural leadership. Just I see that they mentioned that they understand the importance of a diverse representation of perspectives and experiences. However, with their staff and their board, I think there's specific notes on one person who kind of intersects on these perspectives and experiences. So I would be interested to see how they plan on hiring, just looking at their budgeting and seeing how that's reflected in their budgeting, how they plan on they did mention that, but I'm curious on their capacity building expenses. It mentions that growing programmatic capacity will allow us to increase the speed of client intake, alleviate our wait list, and ensure an extension of our public workshops. And they would cover partial compensation for additional staff focusing on BIPOC and LGBTQ providers. So I'm just curious on how, if they could have expanded upon that would have been awesome. And that was most of my notes for this organization.
Thank you, Tiffany and eBay. Any other panelists like to add any additional comments?
Yeah, so in the cultural leadership section number 3, it's to be consistent in how you are citing communities. So percent breakdown is provided for some communities, but not for others. So we specifically see here that it says 36% are people of color, and then it says others identify as members of the LGBTQ community. It creates a problem that we don't have context for what that is. And some could, in theory, be one person. It could be 20 people. Whatever method or approach you use that the whole way through for all entities. Given that the organization deals with disability at its core, a concern I have is disability was not referenced at all in leadership. So I kept looking through, right, what, are people who are here, members who have used these services, are these, yes, there are people who are mental health professionals, but ideally we should be having people who themselves have mental health issues or have had mental health issues or disabled across the spectrum, given that it is the definable core base of what the organization is there to do. I don't know if there's an answer for this, but when it came to what they're providing with therapists, I wanted more info in terms of things like virtual access, and was curious if, in terms of reaching people outside of the state, is there a way with their funding or with their resources that they could bring in therapists for their client base from outside the state of Texas, and what would that look like? Because this was referenced, I know there is a shortage as well, and I do realize we may be eating up resources in other states for doing it here in Texas, but just a place for perhaps more context.
Thank you. And I just want to add that just in terms of therapists, you have to be licensed in multiple states to be able to provide therapy to folks in other states. So just want to give that as a little context, like you're not licensed in the state of Texas, you cannot provide therapy in the state of Texas. And are there any other, I think Hector, you might be. Right. So,
Okay, seeing that there are no additional comments, let's go ahead and move on to the next applicant. So please finalize your scores for Sims Foundation and then prepare to discuss Forklift Dance Works. B will be the primary and Tiffany is the secondary. And then just, I'm gonna reset the timer, and B, if you're ready, if everyone else is ready, we can get started.
Awesome. So Forklift Dance Works, their mission is to activate communities through a collaborative, creative process by doing creative dances with them that reflect their movement and stories on their terms, offering frontline personnel and others a chance to share their expertise in a public forum that may not typically be available to them. I am familiar with Forklift, have been familiar for a while. I first learned about them actually through a documentary that was in South by Southwest many years ago, that focused on trash workers, garbage workers, and a dance utilizing them. They reference that, demographically, they're doing a lot with working class individuals. It's not necessarily clear what the breakdown is key constituency wise overall, both in terms of participants and general audience. And I realize that that may shift from year to year depending upon what the original work or works is that they're creating. But like for their upcoming project, they reference specific BIPOC elements in terms of ridership. But it wasn't clear if like that is the entirety of what the focus of this is going to be, or if in the process of this there happen to be members of these communities present. And although there's a deep tie within the organizational leadership to the state of Texas, not necessarily clear within key constituency base otherwise how the leadership at times aligns. They do use in the accessibility section the phrase fully accessible, which is a red flag phrase for me, as I've referenced before, because fully accessible is not it's not possible, and it removes autonomy from disabled people like myself. They also largely list things that are either by request or already required by the ADA. Given their on-site things, it can be tricky to specify, as they may not know what things are going to look like. But that's an area where audio description, which is referenced to me, should be like top of the list. Marketing wise, I can definitely say that they do a decent job of getting the word out within and outside Texas. And what is just refreshing with what they're doing is this idea that anyone can create art, that anyone can dance, that so many things can be movement, and we can learn and all benefit from this, that we don't necessarily have to have had 30 years of professional dance instruction and training to be able to embrace our unique bodies and the unique process in which we operate day to day that we may not even consider to be art, but absolutely can be.
Thanks, B. So I'm also familiar with Forklift Dance Works, and I guess just off the top, I could say that I really do appreciate their unique approach to community building and dance presentation for a lot of the same reasons that B also just described. Forklift has a history of serving key constituency groups. I think more definition around what that looks like, again, could be more clarified. I do think it does depend on the programming from year to year. And so how is that being approached to ensure equity and inclusivity would be helpful to see defined. The main thing that stuck out for me was that the applicant did not provide a clear description of leadership roles and relationships to key constituencies. I was unable to tell how that leadership was being reflected with the key constituency groups. Forklift does do an additional job. They do a good job of providing expanded ADA access for their programming, working with ArtSpark. I think there's possibility they could possibly provide more, but I do know that they do go beyond by that that partnership with ArtSpark.
Tiffany, can I just ask a clarifying question? You mentioned the leadership, that you didn't get the relationship between the leadership and the constituents. What can you?
Yes. let me pull it back up. So leadership, they do list the individuals, but there's no demographic breakdown or, so I'm not sure from what I'm seeing here if they represent the key constituency groups that they're serving. I do have
Like
information.
specifically in terms of racial and ethnic identity.
That's correct. Do they have lived experience?
Yeah, I think there's a statement actually in the narrative that speaks to their lived experience. It does not go into it's the sentence right above. It opens up and states. I just read this. Their lived experience. Yeah. Their lived experiences and cultural backgrounds direct, inform, and enrich our artistic endeavors, ensuring authenticity and relevance in our performances. So I just wanted to state that is there. So I don't know. Again, it could be the thing where you are wanting to just not have to guess what that is. So I think that's feedback, but I also just want to note that they do specifically reference that here.
Where are you referencing?
I don't know if you see what I see, but it's under the who holds decision-making power in your creative practice.
Don't think I have access to that.
The cultural leadership question. I think you have to, because I see. So
Two main groups that hold decision-making power are collaborative constituent.
Yeah, if you go to the
team.
Yeah.
So I feel like that top sentence gives a high level description, but I don't have detail on it. And then it goes.
I'm just saying that the fourth sentence actually says their lived experiences and cultural backgrounds direct, inform, and enrich our artistic endeavors, ensuring authenticity and relevance. So I'm just stating that there is a line that says that. It does not break it down, but I just want to acknowledge that it is there to an extent. I think the takeaway would be that, to be more explicit and
And we have about minute and a half left for any additional comments.
I liked this application. In their proposed public activity, I enjoyed reading it. However, I would have liked to see how the performance for the love of my horse. Oh,
1 minute left.
okay. I would have liked to see how the performances they mentioned for the love of my horse, a performance with horse riding communities, seeks to reveal and celebrate significant underseen culture of horses and trail riding in Texas. I would have liked to see how their proposed public activities are directly engaging the key constituencies that they mention above and how it impacts them with both proposed public activities. And are these dance performances? It would have been nice to go into detail in that regard.
10 seconds left. Any final comments? Okay, go ahead and finalize your scores. And we'll move on to Sonic Guild. Hector will be the primary and B will be the secondary. We'll give everyone a couple seconds to wrap up their scores, and then Hector, whenever you're ready, when you begin speaking, I'll start the timer.
Okay, so Sonic Guild, their main purpose is to build community and support creation in performances. They do include, their constituents that come from all over the city, right? They're music fans and musicians and music industry professionals. What they want to do, one of the things that did strike me, by the way, this application for the most part was well written. However, they do address inequities, which is really great. They talk about that in several parts, several sections of their proposal. They do want to, this funding is primarily for their main events. One of them is called the Love Your Music Fest, and the other one is called the Sonic Guild Ball. The first one, a Music Fest, they schedule that during the South by Southwest week. And the other one, the Sonic Guild Ball is January 2025, which they usually schedule it around. Oh, actually, they use the venue ACL Live. Some of what what I would have liked to have them include more is their key constituencies. They don't quite give enough specifics on that. Both in I believe in both the language and the disability, being able to provide services for people with disabilities, they do not mention the work with a trained professional. Actually, they do mention that this funding will be to expand their language services, because they realize they do not do as good a job as they can with that. Let's see. Oh, they did in their marketing plan. I didn't see how they're going to market to people with disabilities, and their goals. They did state some goals. However, they didn't say how they were. They didn't explain whether these are achievable and how they will measure these goals. Otherwise, yeah. Those are the last three things I mentioned are the recommendations that I have.
Yeah, I think Hector did a great job of encapsulating this application. I'm gonna go from the bottom set. They do the end of the application. As an organization, that they do admit that they don't necessarily cater to specific demographics. This is an opportunity in this application, perhaps for future years, to take the fact that they do admit that they are disproportionately LGBTQIA+, that perhaps there is something they could do around Pride. The beauty of how this application process is set up is it's not only how an organization operates year-round, but the funding set can be allocated to a specific aspect or a specific event within an organization. So sort of, get your minds going of how those funds can be and work to build that out. In their marketing, I struggled a bit because it wasn't really clear how using the marketing resources they would engage demographically in terms of the city-based key constituencies. And throughout this application, it really was difficult, other than queer people being represented at about double the rate that they are in the general populace, how or who they would be approaching. And I know it can be difficult when you're a general-based arts organization, but like even the BIPOC element that's cited, it's only partially cited. It's an incomplete set of statistics. So we just know that over half of the musicians who are funded are BIPOC. That could be 50%, 0.01. It could be 99%. And even further, what is the breakdown, Latinx, Asian, just in general as an application, the more times you can provide us with specifics that help us contextualize the work that you do, and who you are servicing, just the more beneficial it will be in helping us evaluate. Inaccessibility, they absolutely do have some things that they provide. They're not necessarily everything that they could do, but they do use the phrase fully accessible, which is, again, that red flag for me because it's not something that is possible. But I also want to acknowledge that they pay their musicians. Without knocking South by Southwest too much, it is refreshing that there is a space for people who potentially can get more compensation than what they could have through an official allotment in a different organization that's operating on a for-profit model.
Thank you, Hector and Bea. Are there any other comments from other panelists?
Okay, if there are no additional comments, we'll get ready for the next application. It's Austin Sound Waves. Hector, you will be the primary, and EBA, you will be the secondary on this one. Hector, whenever you are ready to begin, I will start the timer.
Okay, so this organization did a very good job of completing the application. They provided plenty of detail in all the sections. What they do is they provide equitable and engaging arts education and performance opportunities. So they want to make, they want to make this accessible to all. What they plan to do, they have events that they do. Actually, they have 45 events that they do throughout the year. It is all free programming, and it is focused on marginalized communities in East Austin. So they do all the preparation. They do everything that is required for this. They do a great job of involving the community and the artists. And let's see. Yeah, they do an excellent job explaining around intersectionality as well as accessibility, both for people with disabilities and also Spanish-speaking communities. Let's see. The marketing, they also do a great job of explaining. They covered all the points that they needed to cover, which is really good. They're doing a great job with that marketing. So. Yeah, for this application, I do not have any recommendations. Again, they did an excellent job in providing the necessary information.
EBA, are you ready?
EBA,
Thank you,
whenever you're ready.
Hector. Yes, I agree with most of Hector's notes on this application. I appreciated that in their work samples that were shared, I could see the work that they had done in the previous year with the Elevates. So that was great. I hadn't heard about them prior to this application, but it was nice to see the videos of the performances and the students as well. I also, just in terms of their marketing, the only notes I would have is because they're doing great work. For example, with their private lesson program, the Austin Soundwaves private lesson program, free to the student, private music lessons to middle and high school students. If they could just expand on that in terms of their marketing and how, I'm looking at their budget right now. Want to make sure. So it says marketing primarily support to market our programs through our digital marketing channels. How are they specifically marketing to their key constituents on the east side and specifically in Austin as well? I would have liked to see that, but overall, this was a good application.
Thank you, Bay and Hector. I do want to say in the marketing narrative. They did speak to utilizing KAVI as a market tool, which is a Black locally owned radio station that they speak to. They also speak to a lot of there's a Black I was gonna say Black church because I see chapel, but it's actually Houston Tillerson College. So there is a little bit more in the narrative, and so just want to state that it is there is some places in which they specifically reference reaching key constituents there. So any anybody else have anything that they would like to add for Austin Salmon?
Okay, go ahead and finalize your scores. At this time, we have gotten to our lunch break, so we'll go ahead and finalize your scores, and then we'll take a 1 hour break, maybe slightly more than 1 hour, and we'll be back at 1 p.m. To finish up the afternoon session of our applications. That have joined us after lunch so that they can have the same information that the applicants who joined in had at the beginning of the morning. My name is Anne Marie McCaskill Davis. I'm the Cultural Funding Specialist Senior with the City of Austin Cultural Arts Division. Priscilla Hale is joining us as our facilitator. All of the panelists have reviewed the applications prior to today. They have all provided tentative scores and comments. They are allowed to make adjustments to their scores and comments as we go through each panel discussion today. Each application will be given 10 minutes maximum for discussion. If there are any technical issues that we run into, we will stop the timer and stop the recording, correct those, and then start again from where we left off. Panelists have been asked not to repeat themselves, so they may have similar comments and thoughts about an application, but we've requested that they not necessarily repeat their comments. Additionally, panelists are not required to score on consensus, so panelists can have divergent opinions about each application. The panelists will not be announcing any numeric scores. They'll just be providing overall comments from their applications being reviewed. Panelists have been instructed not to score the applications based on information not included in the scoring rubric. So things like geography or financial need are not considerations, and they should not be scoring on those sorts of things. We've also asked the panelists to look beyond grantsmanship because we know that there are many applicants who this is their first time applying. And so we encourage them to do that. Panelists have also been instructed that firsthand experience is okay to share, as well as taking a look at websites of the applicants, but that is not necessarily required. If a panelist has a conflict of interest, they will recuse themselves by turning off their camera and muting themselves through the duration of that particular application. And then once all the scores are finalized, they'll be invited to join us again. I think that is everything. I'm going to announce primary and secondary reviewers. Primary and secondary is just a way for us to organize the panelists to ensure that we have people prepared to speak in depth about a particular application. It does not mean that only those two people have reviewed the application. All panelists have reviewed the applications presented today. Let's see. Our first application that we will be reviewing this afternoon is MindPop. I have B as the primary and Hector as the secondary. Let me pull up my timer. Timer's ready. So B, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Sure. So MindPop is an organization that works to diversify the teaching artist community. and provides support for artists interested in creating additional revenue streams in arts education to support their artistic practice. They support teaching artists at every stage of their career, prioritizing artists of color and artists with disabilities. I'll start with that I loved the specific programming breakdown that's sort of listed in the start, that also then goes much more in depth with this Day of Dance festival that they offer, that widens it from teachers onto students. There's a lot of demographic info that helps sort of contextualize what's going on. Throughout this application, there's a lot of referencing to prior responses, which is also appreciated. We all have limited memory capabilities as we're going through, and to get reminders and refreshers, and you know how it also lists later on where some of their funding is coming from, how they have lobbied to, how they have evolved as an organization. They have some really interesting teacher fellowships, specifically for artists of color and individuals with disabilities. The organization does appear to be pretty representative of the communities that they serve. A lot of queer representation, varying degrees of representation of people of color. It's not broken down as much as I would like in that response, but does cover a largesse. Despite the fact that they have all of these things that they're doing for individuals with disabilities, I struggled a bit with their accessibility response. They do have clear services that are provided, but a lot of what was referenced was limited and or not specific enough, or was stuff that is either by request or ADA centered, versus going beyond. They listed into their marketing not just sort of diverse approaches, but really highlighting into key publications and how some of those publications could serve. I do wish there was more on really what is zeroing in on constituencies, but was really, really impressed overall. As we're dealing with potentially funding for Thrive in addition to Elevate, I said there's a lot of specificity until we get to that very last question in terms of goals. And it's not really any info that we could use as panelists in terms of measuring success. And so just, as you're shaping these things, really concretely zero in so that there's a clear A to B to C step process and a definition of varying degrees of success on whether or not you have met those goals. Really wonderful to see an organization that's bridging the gap between teachers and students, that therefore I would argue is feeding into the work of lots of other organizations too. And I enjoyed this application.
Yeah, I agree with all that Ryan said. There's just a couple of things that I want to add. Actually, I want to emphasize first something that Ryan said a couple of times, is that they do not specifically mention the key constituencies of this grant. Like the impact of the work, how it's going to impact key constituency. There was no breakdown in the budget, at least in details. They provide, the total cost, but they don't. I didn't see anywhere where they had detailed information about a breakdown in their costs. And then same thing with goals. They just, they were not well defined. There was no way to know how they're going to measure them, or even how they're going to know the impact of their goals.
Thank you, B and Hector. Any other comments from the other panelists?
Okay, seeing no additional comments, we'll move on to the next application. Please go ahead and finalize your scores for Mind Pop. Next up is Austin Playhouse. EBA will be the primary and Tiffany will be the secondary. EBA, whenever you're ready to begin, I'll start the timer once you begin speaking.
Thank you for that. Austin Playhouse, their mission celebrates the diversity of the human experience through professional theater that nourishes minds, delights spirits, and enriches the lives of the artists and audiences in our community. I personally had not heard about them prior to reviewing this application, so it was refreshing to see all of the work that they've done in the city thus far. I especially liked how detailed the application was, specifically mentioning their constituents and their leadership and how they relate to the constituents as well, in terms of specific partnerships that they've had with local organizations in the city and specific names of the board members. Because for me, I like to research, and so it was easy to just copy and paste and see these partnerships, and it's also listed on their sites as well, websites and social media. Another thing I really appreciated was during 2020, I see that they improved, they stepped up and improved in terms of their virtual solutions, because as a theater company, they were mostly live and in person, but then they stepped up and have virtual options for viewing. So I really appreciate that. I have no specific notes in regards to their application. If anything, just maybe making it more bullet points. That's the main note I have for this organization.
eBay, when you say more bullet points, can you?
In with their application, it was mostly in paragraphs for some specific answers, like the specialized accommodations, accessibility, intersectionality as well. So just, I like how detailed it was, but maybe making it more like concise. I think I would have appreciated that.
Thank you. So I'm familiar with the Austin Playhouse. They've been around for quite some time in Austin. They were established in 2000, and I would say they've done a pretty good job of presenting diverse productions that reflect key constituency groups and lived experiences. The organization has evolved to serve key constituency groups identified by the city of Austin. And this especially happened, and it was also mentioned just in 2021, when they strengthened their commitment to equity through their strategic planning initiative and received DI training from National Service from the National Service Organization Theater Communications Group. So that was glad to see that also. Their productions do include a diverse cast, BIPOC and LGBTQ playwrights. It's really great to hear and see those voices on stage. I also appreciated seeing that the Austin Playhouse is affiliated with the Actors Equity Association, which is a union of professional actors and stage managers. Union artists receive a living wage, pension, and health benefits, which I enjoyed seeing that too. I've known a lot of folks who have done theater in Austin. I know that's not always the case. I enjoyed reviewing their planned activities. One thing that did come up was when I was reviewing their leadership, I was having a hard time determining if the BIPOC and LGBTQ leadership represented a majority or just some of the leadership. So either just providing percentages or something to give more information on that would be helpful. Overall, the applicant did a good job of providing the information and support needed for the application.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from other? Go ahead, please.
So when you go on the Austin Playhouse website, they have an artistic company. So essentially, right, performers who are a regular element of their theater. And the images that we get don't necessarily match the information that's being provided in the application. And so I wanted to know, right, it's great that they are doing these shows that are all people of color casts, but what is being done to elevate those performers and make them regular members of the company and therefore have more consistent placement in employment? And since we don't have the info that was referenced earlier, I found myself going to the website out of curiosity. So that's, you know, an area of strengthening, and I wanted that demographic breakdown. What is the difference between just people who are actors in their overall season, and what is the breakdown of elevated members of their company? And then, even though they provide what I will say is an amazing service for people who are disabled, I wish more theater companies would go through the pay process to allow their productions to be available digitally, which does cost a premium for shows that are still under copyright. To be clear, that can be very expensive. I just would like to know and to see there's nothing about disabled talent. People with disabilities are the second largest minority in Austin, Texas. When was the last time Austin Playhouse did a show that had a majority disabled cast that reframed, say, a Shakespearean production, putting people with disabilities front and center? Because statistically, they are the least represented demographic when it comes to live theater performance, but they are statistically the most likely audience to actually engage with live theater.
Is anybody else? I do want to make reference to, I know there was a comment, B, that you said you went to the website and you saw images, so just want to be mindful and careful about making assumptions about identities based on what you were seeing. So just want to make sure that everyone keeps that in mind, but also just information for the applicants to note that that is how what folks are seeing and how that plays out. But we also want to make sure that we're being equitable in terms of like looking at images and determining what's the representation of folks.
Thank you, Priscilla. If there are no additional comments, go ahead and finalize your scores. And then the next application we will be reviewing is Motion Media Arts Center. Tiffany will be our primary and EBA will be our secondary. Tiffany, let me reset the timer, and then as soon as you begin speaking, I'll get us started.
So Motion Media Arts Center, I really enjoyed learning about this organization. I wasn't previously familiar with Motion Media Arts Center. They were founded in 2002. Motion Media Arts Center's mission is to support underrepresented people in the arts by offering artistic and professional development, facilities, education, and exhibition opportunities with an emphasis on creating pathways into creative industries for communities of color. Overall, I really enjoyed reading through the application. I felt like they were able to adequately support and provide the information requested. One thing I was slightly curious about was they did make a statement that they have a success rate of 85% among 15,000 direct participants. Just curious how success is defined and measured there. They do state that these programs help artists level up by creating pathways to refine their craft, learn skills, and present work through ongoing public events, career support, education opportunities. But more definition on, exactly what they mean there would be helpful. The organization's leadership directly and clearly reflects the constituency groups identified by the city of Austin. And I don't have any other notes really besides that. I enjoyed learning about their programming. I'll probably have to, check them out. But that's all I've got.
I would agree with what Tiffany shared as well. The main part I enjoyed was the, let's see, the medias that they had attached as well. The work samples, very reflective of the overall application, and then also their support, letters of support. That was great to have. I'm excited to just even attend some of their events as well. So that was my major note.
Thank you. Any other panelists have anything they'd like to add here?
Okay, seeing no additional comments, please finalize your scores. We'll go ahead and move on to the next application, the Museum of Human Achievement. B is the primary, Hector is the secondary, and Tiffany has a conflict of interest, so she is off the dais. B, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
So the Museum of Human Achievement is a East Austin arts organization and community space founded on principles of affordability, equity, and access. They provide professional support and space to key constituents who have historically lacked access to institutional resources. So studio, office, gallery space. They note that for 22 artists and or social change organizations. I was not familiar with this organization. Their name definitely caught my attention right away. I wanted to know how the choice of Museum of Human Achievement came to be, because that is quite a wonderfully audacious and bold name for what it is that they're doing. I will say that they provide breakdowns in terms of what they're offering and who they're offering, but the frustrating thing is it's not consistent. And so they cite, for example, disability status as being a factor of key constituencies, but there's no statistics when it comes to disabled people who are using their spaces. The same thing happens when it comes to their board members and their staff. So does that mean that there are no disabled people at all? That's possible. We can't know because the info is not provided to us. So if you're going to list or reference a demographic, make sure that the stats apply in the same way to all the other demographics that you cite. It'll just be overall better. Something kind of cool that they do, because they have these spaces, they waive rental fees for organizations that are not necessarily tied to them day to day. It's not entirely clear what the breakdown of that is, which I would have liked. But they do note that they've had 5,500 artist projects and over 220,000 visitors, which is a pretty massive amount for a small, medium-sized organization with just a couple of full-time staff and a few part-time staff and contractors. I really like their approach to intersectionality. And they have a wealth of accessibility services that are referenced, and to one of my panelists' prior points, they actually break it down into standards of care, looking at different aspects of it in a way that, and we all process information differently, but that we can clearly see one section and that is explained. Another section of disability and what is being provided is explained. It's not necessarily clear what is coming from a professional service, but diversifying how the information is laid out is always a plus. The budget is well thought through, and they have somewhat definable goals with a multi-year trajectory. I do wish in how they were laid out that it was easier to measure and determine how this can contribute to it and what success would be. But love learning about what they're doing and how they're positively contributing to opening the door for a lot of other organizations that otherwise might not be able to afford to have space in East Austin.
Yeah, I agree with all that Ryan just explained. The only thing that I noticed was the goals. They just didn't mention if they were they appear to be achievable, right? I'm guessing, but there's no way for them to. There's no explanation of how they would measure their impact.
Thank you, Ian. Hector. Is there any other? Oh, I guess just eBay. That would be you since Tiffany.
Okay, if there are no additional comments, you may finalize your scores for the Museum of Human Achievement. And then we'll move on to the next application. I'll go sharing our narratives. Hector is the primary, B is the secondary. And then once everyone's finalized their scores, just give a thumbs up so that way Tiffany knows when she can come back on screen. Hector, are you all set with your scores for MOHA?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, Tiffany, you can go ahead and come back. I'm gonna reset the timer. And then Hector, you may begin.
Yes. So the work, the mission, and of this organization is to create a just and equitable society that nurtures the vibrant queer people of color community. They do this through doing cultural arts, social justice programming, supporting the arts, the artists and their expression. They center the voices of the communities that they serve. The activities that they are planning are they will host installations at various points of the year and at that ground floor theater. And they will host queering liberation open mics. And they do say that they welcome community members to express themselves in these activities to build community. Here are some recommendations is that there's no throughout, I didn't see a specific mention of key constituencies and how they're serving, or the impacts of the project, how they will impact, again, the specifically key constituencies of this grant. There's no mention of the makeup of their board, the representation. They also there were no plans to extend services for disabilities and also for language services. They did mention that they use postlingual, but it was very limited. They did say though that they are committed. They are not committed. They are considering making language more accessible. They realize that they're not doing as much as they can. There's no in their marketing plan. There's no mention of how they will reach non-English speakers in the budget. There's also no mention of language and disability services and expanding those. And yeah, there just isn't enough details on their goals.
So before I go in to our facilitators, I have a question from the marketing response that it may just be mine, it may have been the applicant's, I don't know, but it ends in an incomplete sentence, and I just put a flag on it. Where they say we will reach tourists through similar platforms with an emphasis on, and that's all I have in what I can see. So
Hey, go ahead and go through your and then
so just wanted to bring that up.
You
'Cause I
kind of
don't
got
know.
muted. Well, hold on. Yeah, Anne Marie, you're muting.
sorry, I was just gonna say that go ahead and give your comments and then I'll take a look at the application and see if I can figure out
Yeah.
why that's maybe the case.
Okay, because I just wanted to be sure. I will say that there's with how this application was done, there's a lot of sort of reading between the lines because some of the specifics just aren't necessarily there. They do reference how they affirm this intersectional community, and by definition, this is a structurally intersectional organization. I wanted to know more about how what they're offering separates themselves or makes them unique or valuable to this intersection of community that may not work within just a large S queer organization. When it comes to accessibility, I will say that I would argue by definition, Boost Lingo essentially is a by request thing. It's not something that's really engaging with capabilities and coming by default. I think there's a lot that this organization could do. I specifically looked at, they referenced this library that they've started, and that may be an opportunity with a lot of things that can be done, not just in terms of having books that are not in English, books that are perhaps in Braille, books on tape for individuals as well, which is a different learning approach, not just for individuals who are blind or low vision like myself. I love what they're doing. And I'm curious what the clear challenges are up ahead. As my colleague noted, there's a lot of ambiguity within this application, and in the marketing section, um, I may have missed this. Why say that that the answer, at least I have, is incomplete. But there's no, at least in what I have, demographic specificity, which I just think is so important. There's things that can be possibly inferred, but without insulting myself and my panelists, just assume the lowest common denominator of knowledge. And I think that will help you as an applicant in the future.
Thanks, B. And just to address your question about the marketing question, it looks to be that it's likely a copy paste error is what it looks like to me. They didn't hit I double checked to make sure that they didn't hit the 2000 character limit. It's under 2000 characters. So that would be my guess.
Yeah, so just double check before you submit an application would also be a note, so we can only evaluate what's there. Thank you.
Thank you, Hector and B. Are there any other comments from other panelists?
Okay, we'll move on to the next application. So go ahead and finalize your scores. The next application up for review is Blue Lapis Light. Hector will be the primary, Tiffany will be the secondary. And Tiffany, whenever you're ready to begin, I'll start when you begin speaking.
I'm sorry, I think you mentioned you were talking about me, right?
Yes, sorry. Yes, Hector,
Right.
whenever
Okay.
you're ready to start. Yes.
Yeah, this was one of
Sorry
those,
about that.
this was one of those assignments I got today, and I thought, what did I write? Did I write this
No.
wrong? Okay.
It's all
Uh,
you, whenever you're ready.
Okay, yeah. Blue Light is their mission is to create transcendent works of beauty that's offered through dance. They it's particularly aerial dance. They operationalize, which I appreciate them saying this, that equity through the diversity and representation, seeking diverse voices and perspectives in their teams and in their productions. What they plan to do, it appears that they are doing what they call the Urban Dreams. It's an aerial ground performance that takes place at Rebecca Baines Johnson Building. It's based in East Austin, which makes it accessible to people, right? It's in the neighborhood. It will integrate dance with movement, and it's about the struggles of homelessness and what they go through. They also, let's see what. So they mentioned that their key constituencies include individuals that are experiencing homelessness, local artists, and advocacy groups. Now, some of the recommendations would be that the makeup of the board. They do not explain in any detail what the makeup is. The activities do not mention, even though they talk about homelessness, they do not mention specifically how they reach people of color and LGBT. And in their services, they don't mention that they're going to work with or have worked with a trained professional. And I noticed that the budget, the total amount didn't total to, it wasn't in written. However, I did add it up, and it does equal to 150,000. Again, it just wasn't in the actual budget itself.
And just to address that, it's possible that the numerical column of the budget form doesn't calculate if there are like dollar symbols put in. If it's more than numerals, then
Okay.
it may
Yeah.
prevent the calculation from occurring. So just a
Yeah.
heads up on that. It's okay if there's not a calculation. Because
Yeah, like I said, I did notice that the budget did equal to 150, so it was accurate. But I do believe that they did have the signs, right, the dollar signs in that. So it was just not a big deal. I just wanted to make a note of it.
And I'll just add here too, I had mentioned this in the pre-session before lunch. And so I just want to say it here that one of the things that our panelists are saying is that they are not able to, there is the question about your board and leadership representation, but they do not see that information so explicitly. So it would be, I think what Hector is saying is that it would have been stronger and more helpful to be able to see that information delineated somewhere out in the application. So just don't, make assumptions that folks can see that. I mean, I think it's stated to applicants that this was not going to be shown there. So there's other ways in which you can share that information that I think would be helpful moving forward in the application process. And so I know there's second, B, is it you?
Yeah.
No, sorry, no, Tiffany, sorry.
No, you're good. So let's see, Blue Lapis, they've existed in Austin for some time. I've seen some of their programming. I've enjoyed it. I guess throughout the application, I just struggled to connect with how the organization is rooted in serving key constituency groups, BIPOC, LGBTQ, and disabled. The application states that they I can't say it. That they create equity through diversity and representation. However, I didn't see how this was reflected on the applicant's website and provided materials. It appears more that the applicant is seeking to broadly serve all communities. The applicant states that they work with many artists of color. More context and definition of what many is would be helpful. The applicant does state that the leadership of the organization, that there is leadership that represents BIPOC individuals. For the event Urban Dreams, the applicant states that they will raise awareness around homelessness and have individuals with lived experiences of homelessness present their stories. I just have curiosities of, like, will the event also invite those currently experiencing homelessness to attend the event? Are there other ways the applicant can directly support these individuals beyond just awareness itself? Perhaps partnership with Caritas, Echo, fundraising drive, something like that. Just having known people who've experienced homelessness, just, you know, beyond awareness, like what are the direct ways of creating support to that community would just be really helpful to see in the application. That's it.
Thank you, Tiffany. And I do want to say there is a breakdown of the board, which I'm looking at under the cultural leadership and who, so it is there. It does not break it down specifically by ethnicity. It's broken down by people of color and white folks. So, so I did want to say that because the way I phrased it earlier, it sounded like it wasn't there. So an opportunity for other folks on the panel to contribute.
Okay, seeing no additional comments, we'll go ahead and finalize scores for Blue Lapis Light. Then we'll move on to Center for Women in Their Work. B is the primary and Tiffany is the secondary. Give me a moment to reset the timer. All right, B, whenever you're ready to begin, I'll start the timer when you begin speaking.
Yep. Center for Women and Their Work, CWNTW, was founded by activists in 1978 to confront sexism, racism, and homophobia in the arts. Through visual art, music, dance, and theater, they grew out of and remain deeply rooted in their historically underserved constituencies. In Austin, their goal is to serve as a creative hub for these communities. There's a push-pull in this application of providing information that may or may not be relevant to the application and not give and sometimes not giving us the information that we really need to drive forward. So I learned quite a bit about their history in a really cool way, but I will say that a lot of that info wasn't necessarily applicable to the application. And at times ran the risk of going into tokenism, specifically in the second prompt, number 2 with the history, where they reference sharing office space with another organization. They then go in a little bit to what they did with them, but not really enough, and it's not fully clear where that fits into the work that they do. As far as whether or not the leadership is representative, the response that we have, it does give a pretty good breakdown. I do wish BIPOC was separated more specifically, but what I pointed out, it is not demographically representative of the city, and based on the info that we got, not representative of the space that they serve, with the exception that everybody is female. And I am saying female because although they say 8% are LGBTQ, it specifically says identifies as women. There's no indication of non-cis presence. Scrolling down here. The intersectionality response, it came off a bit more like separating instead of connecting. So what I got was a lot of lists of singular identities and not necessarily how that's interwoven truly together, and how having more than one or two or three things is provided. That info I felt was presented elsewhere in the application, but not, I had to read between the lines and sort of go back, scoring set wise. Their marketing response, it wasn't clear to me what they were doing to reach tourists. And similarly, what was really going to be done to connect into untapped audiences, specifically untapped audiences that match the city's definition of key and underserved constituencies. And given that their organization is there to some extent to serve others, I can understand how that can be difficult. But providing that info very concretely, and in a way that a fellow panelist mentioned earlier, really bullet pointing it, I just think is something that could have helped them and could help them in the future with the work that they're doing, and the work they're doing to support other organizations. And my final note, given what they do, since they serve multiple aspects, not just women, they may want to look at a name change or a name rebrand or a subset to indicate the other communities that they work with as well. It wouldn't be the first time that an organization made such a name change to be seemingly more inclusive.
Thanks, B. I don't have a lot to add to that. I feel like that was a very thorough response. And so B touched on a lot of the points that I also had. Yes, other things I can add to that would be that there was no description of implementation of expanded services by trained professionals. But that I do want to note that the applicant does provide adaptations and services to non-English speakers. One other thing that also popped out to me was just the organization was going to use the Thrive Fund to hire the education outreach coordinator position. And again, just wanting to know, how is success measured with that? How is that position going to be sustained after those funds conclude? Center for Women in Their Work, they're a longstanding organization in Austin, and they have an investment in producing shows for individuals self-identified as female. I think just, yeah, there's a few more parts where they could provide more context and value.
Thank you, B. Any other additional comments from other panelists?
Okay, seeing that there are no additional comments at this time, we've hit our next 15-minute break. So let's come back at let's see, 2:03, and we'll get started with big medium. Okay, we will start with our next application, big medium. eBay will begin as the primary and Hector is the secondary. Tiffany Cockhill is off screen because she has a conflict of interest. We'll make sure that everyone has finalized their scores before we bring Tiffany back for the next application. I have the timer up and running, so eBay, whenever you're ready, you may begin, and I'll start the timer when you begin talking.
Okay, perfect, thanks. So I'm familiar with Big Medium. Their mission is to support artists through equitable and inclusive platforms to explore their practice and advance their careers. Big Medium brings artists and audiences together through city and statewide artistic experiences. So they do Austin Studio Tour, Texas Biennial, and the Tito Prize, and they also have the Line Residencies, Big Medium Gallery, and then they manage a couple of studios and galleries as well. I appreciate that with their staff in terms of language accessibility. All of their staff are fluent in Spanish and trained to assist in terms of communication. And then in regards to their key constituents, they have evolved to meet the city's key constituents as well since their time of inception. And then for their marketing, it would have been great to see that their efforts to reach audience members with disabilities, because I did not see anything in that regard in terms of people with disabilities. So that would have been nice to have as part of their marketing efforts and their budget as well. And let's see. In their capital building expense, I believe that was empty as well. Let me just, yes, that was empty. So it would have been great to have that as an area to expand upon just their programming and their reach from their answer in the cultural institution status. So they had mentioned that, they said, what steps will you take over the 2-year grant cycle to make your organization closer to becoming a cultural institution in Austin? And they had mentioned that they estimate that the Austin Studio Tour generates over $1 million in art sales annually. And they aim to double that amount in the next 2 years with smart and targeted marketing campaigns to grow the audience of the tour. So I'm in their budget, I think the capacity building expense would have been a great section to expand upon. And those are my notes.
Yeah, that was a good description. I only have a couple of things. With a Big Medium, it's what I wrote down was they realize that they are not reaching enough. They understand that's important, right? Equitable is important, and it's important for inclusion. However, they aspire to expand their reach to the key constituencies of the grant. The marketing, they do talk about how they're going to reach out to diverse audiences. However, there's no mention of how they'll do that regarding non-English speakers, people with disabilities, and tourists.
Thank you. I do want to add here that there is in the marketing and in the narrative piece a significant amount of this money going to accessibility services around language
Okay.
and ADA accommodations. That one of the things they talked about was that there would be someone who would be tasked with that, because the folks that they do the tours with, some of them don't answer the questions about is the space in which they're utilizing for their tour, where they're showing their art, if it's accessible or not, and that they were going to dedicate one specific person to that. So there's a $10,000 in that amount. So I just wanted to note that that is in this budget, and there's mention of it in narrative.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
at this time, I'd like to invite B if you have anything that you would like to add.
Maybe I'm looking at it wrong, but it says that they consulted with this person back in 2011. There's no mention of this individual, at least in what I can see, coming back today, and nor is the individual's qualifications contextualized. But what it would even be presented would still be following under the ADA, so that the the entire accessibility question as it's framed is solely from the ADA, and I applaud the organization for admitting the shortcomings here. But the question specifically is going beyond the ADA. And when it comes to things like this, art walk, studio tours, multiple spaces, I'll say that allocating specific persons to pre-evaluate and apply a standard that has to be consistent across the board would be my suggestion. As someone who is a quadriplegic who cannot use steps, I will tell you I have had multiple problems with individuals saying a space is accessible and not properly vetting it. But again, as with some of the other applications, it's giving us that info specifically in a digestible way, where we can clearly see the A, B, and C of what is being done. But there's so much capability. You know, I'd also ask beyond location, digitally scanning images, having a tactile tour, or space for individuals who are blind so they can feel art, for example, are ways that that could have been scored higher and grown and been a place for future growth.
Thank you, B. I do want to say that what it's so that they don't mention bringing that person back. What they do mention is specifically hiring a person, support staff to review all of the ADA information and to directly call each artist to ensure that the ADA information that they are presenting is accurate, because they create a pamphlet that is sent out, but it's also on their website in an app to let folks know what type of what do you call it, accessibility there is. And so so I just want to say that that's what and yes, more information and more details would have made this stronger. So thank you.
Okay, if there are no additional comments, we'll move on to the next application. You may finalize your scores. I'm gonna reset the timer. And the next application we will review is Ashita Dance Company. Tiffany will be the primary. EBA will be the secondary. And so Tiffany, whenever you're back on and you're ready to go, I'll start the timer for 10 minutes.
Ashita Dance Company. So from the materials provided, it appears that Ashita originated in Houston and has expanded to the Austin area. Ashita provides BIPOC produced works and showcases diverse artists. I didn't have a lot to say on this one. I feel that they covered a lot of the information requested in the application. I do believe there's room for growth regarding how the organization plans to achieve the cultural institution status and steps to achieve and measure these goals. The goals are sort of broad. They do plan to hire a general manager to help with casting as it pertains to travel coordination. Just more details in general would be welcomed and helpful in that section.
I agree. It was nice to see how they have evolved from Houston and expanding to Austin as well. And it was nice to see in their budget, they mentioned that the actual spending in each category was reduced to 70% to make that total 150,000. In their 2-year plan, it would have been great to see their plans from their accessibility sections reflected in the budget as well. Accessibility, because they mentioned that when in the accessibility section, they mentioned there's a line that says, when Ashita increases its budget to $2 million, we hope to have a fully accessible studio. But this isn't reflected in the budget. And I believe the capital expense section was empty. So I was just thinking, was that an area to, you know, kind of mention that or build upon that plan of having a fully accessible studio.
Like to invite other folks? Go ahead.
So in this application, and this is a potential challenge for an organization that is directly tied to an individual. I had difficulty separating what was the specific individual who founded the company and for whom the company's namesake exists, and the company itself. And especially through the first 3 sections, it took me a while to really be able to sort of lay out, so much so that I put a separate document of what is the applicant singular, the person, and what is the larger organization. And I say, when you are the organization, it can be very difficult to distinguish those 2 spaces. And you know, for the dance thing, as we know to others, fully accessible, that's not a thing, it doesn't exist. And that language removes autonomy from people who are disabled. Certainly a more inclusive studio can exist. But inevitably accessibility aspects will be in conflict with each other to prevent that from being a possibility.
Anyone else?
Okay, seeing that there are no additional comments, we'll go ahead and ask you to finalize your scores, and we'll move on to the next application. Art Spark Texas. B is the primary, Tiffany is the secondary. And let me reset the timer. And B, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Awesome. So ArtSpark Texas is an inclusive arts organization committed to challenging perceptions of how people with disabilities contribute to society, offering artists an opportunity to pursue artistic career, youth a window into the world of creative possibilities, and veterans a creative outlook on healing by building arts-inspired inclusive communities of artists with and without disabilities, you know, that they can create a more caring, creative, and healthy world. There's a lot to appreciate within this application, and some really fascinating history that's going on. However, at the beginning, there's really no statistics. It's a lot of listing of just general things that we don't have the context to be able to provide in terms of key constituencies and really sort of measuring how the organization fits into what these grants, possible grants, because we're talking about multiple options here, are seeking. By their own admission, they represent aspects of their key constituencies, but not equally across the board when it comes to leadership. They don't provide us statistics consistently in that, but they do note that half of their board and staff are people with lived experiences with disabilities, additional 20% in dealing with family members with disabilities, and I do want to applaud them. Depressingly, a majority of organizations that cater to people who are disabled, their boards are not reflective of the communities that they serve. We are the least likely to be in charge of our own voice in such organizations. And so that really is something to applaud, even as other aspects of diversity in that board can grow. I really liked part of their response in intersectionality, specifically the first sentence in the second paragraph that I put a star in, where they say disability crosses all communities and is centered at the interplay with gender identity, race, age, class, socioeconomic status, religion, military status, and ethnicity. And I think it's to understand that, although it's not stated statistically speaking, people with disabilities are the largest minority of every demographic that exists. And so by being a disability catering organization in the way that they are by definition intersectional. A red flag for me, they also use my problematic phrase of fully accessible, which is for me of an extra concern, given that they work with people with disabilities. Said before, fully accessible is not a possibility. It removes autonomy from people who are disabled, such as myself, as well as parts of their own constituency. With the budget, it was a bit of a lost opportunity. Specifically, for example, within this budget, there's so many ways that funds could have gone for Spanish language advertising, multilingual engagement. This is a space where they could have then used for multiple ASL interpreters on top of that. In their pursuit of growth, there is a lot of potential just sort of left on the table. And since they're lacking by their own admission with some of their leadership in terms of BIPOC representation in their budget, in their marketing, there's a space where they can really make active difference and use what this grant set is being allocated for to their benefit. Because you don't necessarily have to have it in place to be eligible for this. So those are my notes. Really love learning about them, and a pretty solid application.
Let's see. I don't have a lot to add. I feel that B touched on a lot of the points that I also thought about. Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to that. I'm sorry. So I felt that they did cover the majority of the questions. There was room for additional context. Overall, they do serve their constituency groups. They do have some leadership that's reflected in their constituency groups. They do employ Spanish translators and provide translation services for their languages. They do provide some expanded ADA services, and their programming does directly serve their groups.
Thank you, B and Tiffany. Are there any other comments from other panelists?
Okay, seeing that there are no additional comments, we'll move on to the next application. Please finalize your scores. Up next is the Rosewood Courts Welcome Center. Tiffany is the primary, B is the secondary. Hector is going to turn off his screen because he has a conflict of interest. Let's see, Tiffany, whenever you're ready, you may begin. As soon as you begin speaking, I will begin the timer.
So the Rosewood Courts Welcome Center, the organization is rooted in serving key constituency groups identified by the city of Austin. Leadership does reflect their key constituency groups. They do provide some expanded ADA services, but I do feel that more development could exist there. They say that E4 Youth will ensure effective communication practices will be in place to ensure that the person with a vision, hearing, or speech disability can communicate with, receive information from, and convey information to, such as the provision of people with provision of providing auxiliary aids and services when needed to communicate effectively with people who have communication disabilities. I wasn't fully clear on how this will be implemented. I see it more as an objective Plan for implementation on specialized language access accommodations also could use some clarity. But they do state that it's an objective of theirs. Additionally, efforts to reach audience members with disabilities and or audience members who primary language is not English are not included in the marketing plan. The organization does not provide clear steps for achieving and measuring their goals. Funding is primarily requested for funding facilities and operational staff, but no plan is presented on how to retain that staff after the Thrive funds cease.
Awesome. So, I will say in the start with the cultural activities, there's this really potentially amazing project that they're doing that can allow for reclaiming and really putting a stamp on a piece of Austin history, a piece that I was not aware of. I wish this info, given the weight of what its purposes for this application, was referenced earlier, because it's not until the cultural activities that we get any info on it. And it's not completely articulated what, other than putting this info into augmented reality and certain aspects of presentation, what is really going to be done with this space. Given the history of the people involved, the intersectionality and inclusion response, for me, missed the boat a little bit. It's a space where they could have really just gone in and highlighted, say, for example, what the reality of a queer Black woman in the work that they're doing with this history could be of value. I do worry about inaccessibility in aspects of this project, especially if things are being mapped out specifically in a virtual reality space. For example, as someone who is low vision, I am not a great candidate for virtual reality because I am blind in one eye and it prevents me from being able to center the image. I would also be curious, in terms of activations that they do when they talk about marketing, given what this organization is, what can be done with somebody like South by Southwest, and is that South by Southwest EDU or South by Southwest Maine? Is that a space in terms of tourist capability, in terms of seeking future funding and awareness that could be tapped into? Overall, I would say it was a really mostly solid application, and not just an organization that's doing some really impactful work, but a project that potentially could make a lot of difference in informing people about some not so pleasant realities that weren't so far away from us.
Are there any other comments from other folks? Oh, sorry, I forgot Hector. And I do want to just point out here that remember just to kind of think in terms of equity around particularly people of color organization, particular smaller organizations, the need for autonomy and how that plays a role in equity around often and too many times being forced to join in or to get a larger organization to do things is not necessarily an equitable way to carry out work. And it often can minimize one's autonomy and have them go off course. So I want us to keep that in mind and to keep that in the forefront when we're thinking about leveraging and why some folks may choose or not choose to or choose not to, and how that can impact how they work within the communities in which they are most directly trying to work with. And so I just want to point that out.
Okay, if there are no additional comments, go ahead and finalize your scores. We will then move on to Art from the Streets. Hector, you may go ahead and come back to the panel. You will be the primary on this one. EBA, you'll be doing the secondary comments. Let me reset the timer. And then Hector, whenever you're ready, you may begin. I'll begin timing as soon as you begin speaking.
Yes, so AFTS, Arts from the Streets, they provide a continuum of care for most marginalized and high vulnerable populations. They primarily serve the homeless or formerly homeless, or those that are at risk for displacement. They do this by offering free supplies, the open studio art sessions. They do those several times a week. And they have their permanent studio is at the Canopy Complex, which is on the east side. What I found impressive was that the proceeds from the sale of the art, 95% of it goes to the artists. So what they are proposing to do this year, I'm sorry, with this money, is to continue their annual. They do have an annual show that they do, and so it's gained I think even national notoriety, and it attracts audiences from across the spectrum in Austin. They, as I mentioned, if I didn't do this earlier, they did an excellent job of providing detail for every one of the sections. And the only thing that I did not notice, and if it's there, I missed it, but they do not plan to work with professionals, trained professionals for disability, reaching people with disability and language. And so, and the other thing is, minor thing is goals. Maybe are not, they don't explain how they're going to measure them.
Yes, thank you for that, Hector. I have a couple of notes on this application. Just piggybacking off what you said about the disability and that intersecting with people who are being displaced, that population. So I'm just going to, I see that they have here in their application that they provide a continuum of care for populations of Austin who are homeless, and they provide the statistics. And but I feel like this would have been what I was looking forward to seeing was how this would be an opportunity to describe in detail how they are actively serving them. And so in their proposed public activity with the annual show, which is great in terms of the proceeds going back to the artists, and how, they've won multiple awards and Emmy nominated, and it has become a model for US and Canada. I guess my major concern would have been if they're serving these populations, who have been displaced or homeless, how does that get them off the streets? I was just looking at their mission and vision. I guess what I'm wanting to see is just how, are those proceeds from the art sale, if that's the major way they are, receiving revenue, is that being used to house these populations, or are they partnering with organizations to house these populations? So that was my major concern with this application.
Thank you. Any other comments from folks?
Yeah, so there's some incomplete citing when it comes to demographics. So they say that the community is 32% Black, 32% Hispanic, 27% white. There's no additional context, no reference of Asian or indigenous populations, but obviously the percent does not come to 100. Well, obviously I'm not the best at math, but it does not come to 100%. And I know certainly when we're talking about homeless population, there's a disproportionately significant impact to the indigenous populace, as well as to the queer community, which is not, and the disabled communities, which is not contextualized there. And although we're not meant to bring scholarship into the equation when we're talking about writing, to be mindful with language, because I think I know what they were getting at. In the accessibility response, they say the process of creating art does not discriminate against disability. But by definition, the process of creating art does discriminate against people with disabilities. The process by which larger society has enabled a system that does not have materials that are adaptive to us. Again, based on the larger response, I have an idea at least of what they were trying to say, but it can come off as being dismissive of the actual challenges to a large part of their populace. And I am curious, my colleague noted, not so much what they're doing in terms of guiding to housing, because I don't think you necessarily have to provide support for housing to be of benefit to the community, to enable to increase the amount of money that's available to them at any time and to give them a creative outlet to do something different. But what is the end goal of the members who are participating that they are using? That isn't necessarily defined within the mission and the info that we have.
I will say that I think there's a line here that it's very brief, but it speaks to that this is an opportunity for them to give folks who are experiencing homelessness a sense of pride and confidence. And they don't, I know there's the mention of around the services that they provide. And I think if they're going to put that, like you said, there would be, there would be, something around like, what is that? But it sounds like what they're doing is they are providing this opportunity for a sense of pride and confidence, as well as people to create art and sell that art and receive 95% of that funds. And if you choose to use those funds towards, temporary housing or whatever, you have the opportunity to do that. So I think they're not determining how these folks should spend money, which I think we want to think about, that there's a sense of autonomy around that. Some folks might use that money. I don't know how much money folks are making, but if it's enough for them to, be in housing for a week, that might be something. So I just want to keep that in mind when we're thinking about the scoring and, what are we scoring here and what are folks being asked to provide in this, just to have a little broader thinking around that. So.
Okay, if there are no additional comments, you may go ahead and finalize your scores. And we'll move on to the next application, which is Texas Folklife Resources Incorporated. B is the primary, Tiffany is the secondary. Allow me to reset the timer. Okay, B, whenever you're ready to begin, I'll start the timer when you begin speaking.
So Texas Folklife is an Austin-based arts nonprofit committed to celebrating and sustaining of the diverse traditions within the Lone Star State through a combination of concerts, educational workshops, apprenticeships, exhibitions, and other events. They seek to promote cultural sustainability through their commitment to help artists, traditional bearers, and communities thrive. I'll say this was a really beginning to end, well laid out, largely descriptive, informative application. And they lay through with leadership specifically, from founding to current, although we don't have statistical breakdowns in a way that I would prefer. We have clear contributions of how these leaders are shaping the work that they're doing, how they are intersecting in the stories that they're telling. They have a accordion program competition. I will say this was an area that I was less clear about. When it comes to language, they note that through this, they have people who are speaking some half a dozen different languages. But it was not clear to me how, in the course of these performances, they were utilizing the different language experiences and realities of their audience and the performers. Like, do they have 6 languages that are being spoken and each one being interpreted through headsets? I reasonably assume that's not the case. So that is one area within this application that could have been stronger. Pulling this up. In the general accessibility question, the way that it's framed comes with an assumption that certain spaces are accessibly compliant, when that may not be the reality. And admittedly, in this section, a lot of what they are addressing are things that are already required by the ADA, when the question that the prompt asks us to specifically go beyond the ADA, which is the absolute bare minimum. Given what the organization does, although they do reference briefly Indigenous dance, which comes up in the cultural activities section, I wanted a bit more in terms of the distinction of what they are doing with and for Indigenous preservation, as well as non-Indigenous, which seems to be the dominant space of their application. It also is not clear at times in marketing how they are reaching specific demographics. And this may seem nitpicky, but I want to be clear, this was such a well laid out overall application. It's just if they were more consistent in how they were citing through demographics, such as in their final response. You know, why is there nothing in that space about expanding board diversity, for example, to represent disabled and queer people whose histories are also overlapping in the realm of the work that they do. But bravo, and I'm very intrigued by your programming. I might even come back to hear a bunch of people play the accordion.
Right. See. Texas Folk Life. So I didn't know anything about Texas Folk Life before reading this application. I really enjoyed learning about this organization and everything that they do in Texas. I feel that it seems to come across, they do a good job trying to serve their key constituents very well, and they have a diverse range of programming. The organization has historically served their key constituency groups and reflects key constituency groups in their leadership, and I really like that also. I felt they did a good job providing the information and support needed for the application.
Thank you, Bea and Tiffany. Are there any additional things from other panelists?
Okay, seeing that there are no additional comments, if you'll go ahead and finalize your scores. We have a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll wrap up with our last 3 applications. So we'll be back at 3 o'clock. Okay. The next application up for review is Sage Studio and Gallery. Tiffany is the primary, eBay is the secondary. I've got the timer ready to go. So Tiffany, whenever you're ready, you may begin and I'll start the timer.
So Sage Studio and Gallery, Sage is supporting artistic growth and entrepreneurship. Studio and Gallery, it's a creative space in East Austin that provides adult artists with intellectual and developmental disabilities, materials, space, and support to produce, exhibit, and sell their art. Their mission is to nurture and amplify the voices of artists with disabilities so that they may meaningfully engage in social, economic, and creative life of the community. I really appreciated that the majority of the applicants' administrative and creative leadership are reflected in their key constituency groups. And they do have trained professionals that provide expanded ADA accessibility and specialized language adaptations. Overall, I really liked learning about the organization. I really liked the programming that they were putting out, and I felt that they presented a very good application.
Okay, Sage Studio. I would have to agree, for a fairly young institution. I'm definitely impressed by the work that they have accomplished since their inception. The major note I have is that as a young institution, it would have been great. It would have been a great opportunity to see their plans of becoming a cultural institution reflected in their budget, specifically in the capacity building expenses. But overall, great application.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from other folks? Okay. Go ahead.
I love that organizations like this are sprouting up. As they point out, only 9% of adults with IDD are employed. That number is so low, you would almost expect it to be the flip statistically of talking about people who are unemployed. But what I really wanted to sort of get from this is, what is the sell rate of artists? What is the money that's coming in? And it may not be enough to be financially independent, but what is the difference there? And as something a bit different that they were doing in terms of accessibility was they were allocating a money for ASL lessons for their own staff. That's a really unique example of like the teach a fish reality, right? Of how then their staff can become professionally trained to do something. I will say the rate seemed a bit low to me, as I know multiple people who teach ASL for a living, and it seemed that it would not be enough instruction-wise to get to their stated goal. But I thought that was really, really cool, that they were committed to doing that. And it can be done, to be clear, not just with ASL, but with any other language or adaptation to train staff so that they can be independent on their own and who they work with. For growth and for tourists, I don't know if it makes sense or not. But it would seem to me that there may be synergy with an organization like Biddy and Bose, which is a coffee shop mini chain, which maybe 10 locations or so across the country that employ people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But I would think that art on the walls in a coffee shop, are there, ways that they can expand the reach of these artists to sell their work.
Could be anybody else have anything?
Okay, seeing that there are no additional comments, please go ahead and finalize your scores. We'll move on to the next application up for review is Zach Theater. B is the primary reviewer, Tiffany is the secondary. Allow me a moment to reset the timer. And B, whenever you're ready, you may begin and I'll start the timer.
Here we are. So pulling it up. And now. So the Zach Theater is a equity theater company. Although I will point out they don't lead with the mention of equity. I do think it's an important distinction when we talk about theater spaces. Equity theater company in the city of Austin that's been here since 1932. So it's many, 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 many years older than all of us. For the sake of my sanity, I'm just going to say 85 or so years older than me. Give myself a couple years benefit here. I will admit that I struggled with a lot of this application. So repeatedly throughout this application, diverse is referenced, but it's a catch-all and there's really no breakdown of what's being provided. We have a history of this organization that certainly was not really catering to these key constituencies, but it's not clear since how those key constituencies differentiate from just being a general theater organization designed to appeal to the largesse of the city of Austin. And as I mentioned with some others in this application, that you're allowed to pull a single project. So even if, as this organization, they may not cater directly to specific demographics, a production could. And it felt like a bit of a lost opportunity from this season. And just knowing the wealth of shows that may have been available to them, and then the dozens of ways that shows that could be reimagined or repurposed. Right? What is it? When you look at the musical Oklahoma in their radically reframed production, or the gender flip version of Company, or the all-female non-cis BIPOC production of 1776, and you don't need to mimic those because they were from Broadway, but the theater itself can put their own spin on similarly well-branded and potentially subscriber-friendly shows. There really is a absence of demographic specificity that makes it difficult to even know within leadership how they are connecting specifically to disabled audiences, to BIPOC audiences, and I hate to use BIPOC as a catch-all, but in this case, that's any aspect of BIPOC, any aspect of disabled. They do reference some numbers, but the numbers are so below representation for the city, never mind if they were truly key constituencies. in the cultural activities, there's nothing that centers equity. And there's no knowledge. I realize their season may not be completely cast, but even from their last season, right, what were those diversity figures so that we can access, you know, does Zach cast quadriplegic people like me in their shows? How many of their individuals are wheelchair users? What percent are BIPOC? What percent are LGBTQIA+? What is the demographic breakdown of their own general theater audience? And they do say, at risk of speaking for wheelchair users, cite broadly that we have made claims of their theater being more accessible. I will say I've used their space before. I don't disagree with that statement. But since it's not really attributed to anybody singular, it does function in a way that removes autonomy from us. And even though it is more friendly than most, I can think of multiple ways that the theater could improve physical accessibility, at least from an audience perspective. I have not been in their backstage area and can't speak to that. You know, and as we go through it into all these other sections, same thing in marketing. It's not clear how they're using those resources to get to key constituencies. And I think in the future with the Zach, I would say, look at your season selection. And does your season selection reflect the demographic space of this city? And that's both in terms of original interpretation of roles and ways that you can reframe roles. So that ideally you have BIPOC people who are doing roles that were written for them, and you have BIPOC people being prioritized in roles, for example, that were not written for them, like all Black productions, say, of a Tennessee Williams show. I know the work that they do. There's so much that I feel could have been done in this application. And regardless of if you're funded or not, you know, use this info in your season selection to pull a season that more reflects the city, that I think will only boost your subscriber base and grow and allow you to be a more sustainable organization.
Right. Black theater. So a lot of my comments are similar to B's. So the applicant states that their constituencies include underserved community groups. However, documentation provided doesn't show that reaching underserved communities is central to the applicant's mission. I really struggled in finding the equity centering in the application. The application has a history of service that seeks to broadly serve all communities, from what I could tell. Again, I'm struggling to see how equity is a part of the proposal for cultural activities. They propose a play about a 1940s cis couple. I don't have any issues with that. I think they can definitely present a play like that, but I don't see how it's rooted in equity. The applicant does include initiatives for ASL performances and bilingual productions. Leadership includes 22% LGBTQ and 22% BIPOC representation. I would say that the applicant has room to develop marketing efforts to reach audience members with disabilities, non-English speakers, and efforts to reach tourists. The organization describes how funding can support stabilization of the organization. More development is definitely recommended in how the organization can reach underserved communities and risk of cultural erasure and other forms of institutional marginalization.
Are there any additional comments? And I'll just add, Tiffany, that last part you said around cultural erasure. I think BU spoke to that it's not representative of the community, of Austin community, and just want to remind that the applicants, that's not the call. The call is for it to be around cultural erasure, and I think Tiffany, you spoke to that. So I just want to state that, you know, panelists were being asked to look at cultural erasure and key constituents, and not does the work reflect the demographics of the city of Austin.
All right. Let's go ahead and finalize our scores for Zach Theater. And go ahead and pull up the application for Downtown Austin Space Activation Program, or DASA. Hector is the primary and B is the secondary. Hector, whenever you're ready, you may begin. I'll start the timer once you begin speaking.
Yeah, the Downtown Austin Space Activation Program, they transform space that's underutilized or empty in the downtown area. They do this by revitalizing, vacant storefronts and public spaces. They mentioned that they offer programming focused on business development, mental health, performing arts. They have public exhibitions and events. Music, performances, cultural tours, and they provide fellowship and residencies and incubators for the artists. They very well they explain with a lot of information about their key constituencies, and they included 4. One is local artists, so they host regular shows, performances, exhibitions in the downtown area, right? They also work with small businesses and entrepreneurs so that they can, they have markets where local entrepreneurs can showcase their products. They also include community residents. So what they do is they do events, right? Cultural festivals, that celebrate local traditions. And they also talk about how their constituency is also visitors and tourists to expand the services and for them to purchase the art. They do provide very specific information about the impact of their work with each of these 4 constituencies, their key constituencies. There are only a couple of recommendations that I have, and one of them is that they do mention that disability services are provided only on request. They are ADA, places that they go to, they are ADA compatible, but they don't provide anything more than that. They also do not mention working or planning to work with a trained professional. The other thing that I struggled with and was hoping to find some information on was accessibility. The events are happening downtown, right? Because that's the spaces that they want to revitalize. But there's no mention as to how the community and artists that need to go there, right, for the events and to see the murals that are being developed. So being able to access it, unless somebody's really close to downtown, right? People further out of downtown Austin may have difficulty accessing some of these activities. Yeah. Okay. One last thing. They don't mention impact on their goals and how they plan to measure those.
Thank you. I agree with a lot of what Hector here has said. First, be careful of using diverse as just a catch-all, to where it just therefore is without specific breakdowns. It becomes a word that's tossed out in such a way that it becomes potentially meaningless because we don't know who or what it is that you are contextualizing. I personally don't know what the breakdown is in downtown Austin. I know it is not the same as in East Austin. I wanted to know where these artists were being pulled from who were doing this work. I really wanted to know how these buildings were being chosen. It's not stated in this application. A potential concern of mine is in reclaiming these abandoned spaces, it may be erasing the history of businesses not getting the support, businesses that were run by individuals who were BIPOC, LGBTQIA plus, low income, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Instead of perhaps what the organization could do to use these beautification elements and these space elements to possibly sustain a business that is on the verge of going under, and allow it to continue. That's not to say that the mission is invalid, but here is a place of growth that I think also then becomes a means of long-term sustainability. And in these applications, I said before that the beauty of what the city of Austin is doing is you don't necessarily have to have something in place. You are allowed to use these funds, if you get them, for something. And so to just stop at the accessibility answer with just one sentence, if we don't provide anything other than on request, it's a lost opportunity. Use this application to get your minds going of what can we do that we haven't done before. And I won't even make the assumption that the spaces they're using downtown are ADA compliant, because I can absolutely tell you there are a bunch of businesses in downtown Austin that are not ADA compliant. And I won't say which one, but when I was here 2 years ago, we were told the space was compliant for me, and instead they had to physically carry my body up a flight of stairs and carry me back and bring my wheelchair up and down with me. It was very not fun, but I promised I'd be present for it. So there's the knowledge. With what they do, I wish the supporting materials really gave us the largesse of the beauty, perhaps, of these works and really contrast what their contribution is, right? What does downtown look like with their work? What does downtown look like without it? And in the events that they do.
Are there any other comments from other?
Just to add to that, I would say that with this application, I also struggled to see the centering of equity for the programming and for the events and the organization. It did fall again into more of a catch-all, wanting to be inclusive for all, which is great, but just more specific ways that equity and the key constituency groups the city of Austin is identifying, how those groups can be served would be helpful.
Anybody else?
Okay, let's go ahead and finalize our scores for Downtown Austin Space Activation Program, or DASA. This concludes the public portion of our panel review process. The panelists will log off and log back in, and we'll do sort of a wrap up before we close out for the rest of the day. Thank you for the participants who came and listened to the panel review today. Whenever you finalize your scores, you may go ahead and log out and then just log back into using the same link that you were sent for today's meeting. I'll see you back here in just a minute.